Hello and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast, in which we explore the many ways to build family and celebrate alternative families. This is Julia, your host, and I have a very special, kind of unusual episode for you. It's a mini compilation episode. The reason I'm giving you this episode is because 2 weeks ago, a good friend of mine who actually happened to be on this podcast, who is a solo mom, discovered that her daughter has leukemia. And her daughter is now going through intensive chemotherapy and will be in the hospital for probably about 2 months, maybe a little bit longer. And so in the moment when all of this was happening, I was thinking, oh my God, this is the WTF moment that Alona talked about in our episode. This is the life-changing drama moment where you are in crisis. And so I did two things. I have to be honest, I did the human thing and my mind immediately raced to my own kid because I think it's just normal for us to extrapolate our fears about life circumstances onto our own lives. And I had that panic of like, oh my God, what happens if something happens to my family? And it's a little embarrassing because I sort of centered myself as the center of the story and I am not the center of the story. So I want to own that and just apologize for that to the universe. But then I stopped and thought about, oh gosh, how do I support my friend? What do I do? And my mind initially drew a blank. I just was in this panic of, I've never encountered this before. I've never had a friend whose child is going through a serious medical crisis. I don't know how to be supportive. But then I remembered there's a bunch of Stork'd episodes about exactly this subject. It turns out that when you're talking about family, you end up talking about a lot of big themes. We talk about life pivots. We talk about disappointment and what to do when things don't go our way. And we talk about grief and fear all the time. So I personally revisited a number of Stork'd episodes to talk to people who had gone through a medical crisis themselves, whose child had gone through a medical crisis, or frankly, who had lost a loved one. That is not to say that this child is at all in danger of that. More to say that the people who have gone through grief know how to show up and support one another because they received support. And I wanted to know what they thought of receiving support. So here's what I've done. I've kind of taken a bunch of those voices and I've put them together so that we can talk about supporting people in moments of crisis. I mentioned the WTF moment a minute ago. Alona talks about receiving a breast cancer diagnosis in her 20s and how it was her WTF moment, what the fuck moment, yeah, I'm going to swear, and how it reshaped her entire life. I want you to just listen to Alona for 1 second.
But getting diagnosed with cancer at age 28 is not something that you see too often. And it's not something that I was expecting, that's for sure. Like, I didn't even really know anybody who had cancer. So kind of, going through that process and being faced with my mortality at that age really kind of forced me, I call it like a WTF moment, right? Like, it's just this moment that makes you rethink everything in your life. Like, what am I doing? What if I don't make it till my 30th birthday? Am I sitting here? I used to sit in my office sometimes and like the automatic lights would go out because it was like I wasn't even there. I'd just be like typing away on my computer and the system, the motion detector didn't even recognize that I was there anymore. And I was like, I don't want this for myself, right? So in many ways, that initial WTF moment really dramatically changed my life. It really taught me a lot about how to be like, no, like I'm going to connect with my soul's purpose. I think, it was the night before I got the results of the biopsy back. I was like laying in my bed and I was super nervous, obviously. And I was trying to do something to feel in control of a situation where there's obviously no control, similarly to infertility, right? And so I took out my iPhone and I wrote this note on my iPhone that was just like, if I found out that I had cancer tomorrow. And I just wrote myself this little paragraph. And it was just this moment of like complete clarity. And I was just like, if I find out I have cancer tomorrow, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to focus 100% on my health and beat cancer. And then I'm going to spend time with my loved ones. I'm going to do something meaningful with my life. Like, it was just like a straight up bullet point. Like, here's what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to fall into these traps anymore.
Okay. So I imagine, maybe it's a little presumptuous of me to imagine, but I imagine many years from now, my friend might look back at this moment, or her daughter may look back in this moment and say, that was my WTF moment. That was a turning point that transformed my life forever. Who knows what the transformation will be? In the moment, though, it is hard to see that and even think about that. Right now, we're in crisis mode. Right now, we are in getting through the day mode. So then I turned to parents who have been on the podcast, specifically Aaron Karchner, about what it's like to support a child through a medical crisis. And Aaron talks about being a NICU parent, and he talks about how you support people in crisis. And Aaron talks about being specific. If you're in crisis, be specific about your needs. So he offers this advice.
It also comes back to, who are you comfortable sharing your vulnerabilities with? And so when somebody asks you, hey, what can we do to help? Then if it's somebody I feel comfortable sharing my vulnerabilities with, it's, oh man, we could really use a meal. Or you know what, if you have multiple kids, these girls really are driving me nuts. Can you take them away for a couple hours? And so like for the NICU, for us, it was a lot of times we needed dog care. We had a dog that was about a year old. We needed somebody to help with that. So I think the best, and this is a huge thing we're an advocate for now, is for people that are NICU parents, is asking the mother or the father, right? Asking the parents, what do you guys need specifically?
You're talking about being really specific with the way in which you offer support.
Right. Yeah. Like, so I think one thing we advocate for a lot for NICU parents in general is, one, letting people know it's okay to tell them to back off. Like, hey, I need my space right now. I'm dealing with a hard time. Like, that's okay. I think a lot of times people, when they're in vulnerable positions, sometimes feel obligated to tell people. It's like, no, I don't need to tell you anything. If I want to, I will, and with who. But then also just letting NICU parents know there's other avenues. Like, we're on the NICU board at the hospital that our girls were born at. And we're part of what's called the Family Partnership Council. And that's where we literally reach out to current NICU parents and say, hey, we're here for support. We've gone through your situation. We can help. We're not telling them to reach out to us. Just like, here's the availability. Here's my number. Here's my email. Here's my whatever. So I think a lot of times for people that are in NICU specific is knowing that there's somebody out there that's gone through similar situations than you. And so like when we were going through ARIA, we'd have a couple of people would say like, hey, I had a NICU baby too. Here's what happened with me. And it's nice to be able to empathize with other people. But just having the availability, and then they should be able to reach out to you instead of trying to being forced help. Because everybody wants to. They want to help you. Your group of people want to help, and they never know how.
It's so interesting because I would never have thought that our journeys are parallel, but the exact same thing is happening with single parenting for me. And the advice I've been given is write down everyone who offers to help. And when you're having a crisis, like I need the dog walked, or I'm starving and there's nothing in my kitchen, can somebody bring me groceries? Or can you just hold my baby while I take a shower? Then you've got the list of people who are available and you can ask, versus sometimes it's overwhelming when everyone's saying, I'm here. And you're like, great, I'm not there yet. I don't know what I need. So I appreciate both the encouragement to be specific if you feel comfortable with that, and the encouragement to say, I just need some space right now.
It's, again, everybody's journey in parenting and family is so different. And there's just not a catch-all, right? Like there just isn't. And like, I know there's parenting books on philosophies and all this stuff, and that's great. But in the end, like, you as the parent in the situation know what you want and or need and or what your child wants and or needs better than anybody else. And if you as the parent also get to make the executive decision of, I don't want to deal with it in XYZ way, you have the authority to do that.
Okay, the be specific is really helpful. It's the thing that stuck with me for the years since I've interviewed Aaron. And Chelsea London Lloyd, who is sort of like, she calls herself the grief gal, and she's sort of a grief counselor. She watched her dad pass away through ALS. Her mom went through a cancer diagnosis. She now mentors children who have lost parents or lost loved ones. And she specifically mentored a child who lost her mom due to cancer. It's all in the episode. But she has become this person, this like go-to person around grief. And so Chelsea says, just show up. If you know someone who's in crisis, be specific about what you can offer. Don't just say, hey, what do you need right now? Because the person in crisis likely doesn't know what they need. They're likely so overwhelmed by grief or sadness or fear or terror or just the like mounting logistics of taking care of a sick child and making sure that they get all the doctors and they need, all the things that they need to get done lined up. They can't worry about telling you what they need. Here's Chelsea.
I do feel like with grief, it's so overwhelming. Sometimes just taking an action is acceptable. So it's like, just send the flowers, just send the cookies, just show up, like just do something, like send a book. Like I thought of you, here's a book, here's a candle. It's like, because everyone's asking, what do you need? And sometimes it's just so overwhelming. This is not just specific to grief, but anything very traumatic. It's like also just taking an action in some form is acceptable.
It's so funny because in some ways it's very similar to having a child or adopting a child.
I was going to say
like opposite ends of the life spectrum. And the recommendation there is not, what do you need right now? Because so often you're just overwhelmed. You don't even know what you need. You don't even know what you want. But a question like, would you like bagels delivered, as you mentioned that you've done in the past, or would you like me to come do your laundry? Those are the two things I can offer you. That's an easy way for you to say, oh, I didn't even remember that I needed to do my laundry today. Mm-hmm. Come do that for me.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for tying it in. I know that your audience is, having babies or thinking about it. And I'm sure that's so overwhelming when you have a newborn and people are like, what can I do? You're like, I don't know, anything. Like, it's just like, must be nice when some people just took an action, right? And just did something for you.
But, we talk on my podcast a lot about community and about family and about family being outside the bounds of who is related to you and caring about somebody enough to remember an anniversary such as this one is showing up. It's being family in some ways. That's interesting. Just show up, be specific. I then turned to Tracy Weiss, who's with the Chick Mission, which is an organization designed to make sure that fertility preservation options are available to people facing cancer. And Tracy talks about her experience with cervical cancer, and she talks about the community that rushed in to show up and be supportive for her. She has a really beautiful example of the way in which her brother showed up. So I wanted to hear, okay, if we're going to just show up, that's a theoretical concept, but how does that feel to the recipient of just being showed up for, of somebody whose people show up for them? Here's Tracy.
I have the best community that I honestly think at some point they should be card-carrying members of, some sort of unification or religion. People show up. My people show up. They say what they want to say. They mean it. They put their money where their mouth is. My people show up. I think that cancer was the first time that I allowed myself to be vulnerable, to let them in the way I needed them. And that continued for the next 10 years of my life. When your friends or your family, you coalesce and you grow. And there's been other major events since cancer, and they've showed up. And I hope that the converse is true. Yeah. And that's not to discount that, my brother particularly is an incredible human being and my best friend. But it's hard to talk to your little brother about your vagina cancer. And B, he was like in law school. Yeah. You needed your girls.
Yeah. No, you need your girls around that stuff. There's certain things you need your girls around. Yeah.
I will tell you, my brother, who is afraid of everything medically, I am basically his mother. He came to New York right after my surgery, pushed me around the block in a desk chair.
Oh.
So we could go out and get some fresh air. Went and saw Avatar. And when the music started and Dolby surround sound, I was so overwhelmed because I'd been inside for so long that I started to cry. And most people would be like, what's wrong with you? He just started laughing, which is exactly what I needed, and in the way, if you are lucky like me and you have enough friends, someone will always show up in the way that you need.
Yeah, I love that. Exactly. Oh my God, I just love Tracy. I could just listen to Tracy forever. She's just so enigmatic and energetic and warm. But here's a concept about showing up. We've talked about being specific in the way we showed up. We used to talk about just showing up. We've talked about the feeling of being showed up for. I don't even know if that's grammatically correct. But Brooke from season 1, who runs a podcast called The Grief Coach, actually says something really interesting. And she says that in our culture, there's an expiration date on grief, or there's an expiration date on when people continue to think about you and your needs when you're in crisis. And she says, if you're going to show up, don't stop showing up. Don't send the flowers, don't send the food, don't send the love, and then just disappear. The person still needs you. in my friend's case, probably will still need us after recovery, probably will need us many years into the future because she and her daughter are going through a traumatic experience right now. So keep showing up. Don't forget the person. Here's Brooke.
And I didn't realize until after, when I was on the other side, I was like, oh, this feels terrible. When people would tell me, I'm sorry for your loss, I would be like, me too. Like, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me. Sometimes you're like, okay, thanks. But it doesn't, I don't know. I didn't feel like that was enough. And I often find that people are uncomfortable with the conversation. So they want to check the box of, I'm sorry, I sent you flowers or a card. I went to the funeral. And after 4 to 6 weeks, people move on and maybe stop treating you with kid gloves almost, because there's this statute of limitations on public grieving. I mean, if you've experienced a loss, you know that that's not true and not how it works, but people give you grace in that immediate time afterwards. But processing grief can take a lifetime, and different things come up at different times based on where you are in your life. So the first episode I did is called I'm Sorry for Your Loss, and other misguided things people say, because I want to change the conversation around what do we say to people who are bereaved. So I'm here for you. Don't expect that you know what someone is feeling and say, I know I don't know how you feel, but I'm here for you.
I also reached to Amanda, who was on an episode about losing her child. And her episode was extremely tragic because not only was it the loss of her child, but she had to continue to relive that loss due to people on social media attacking her and blaming her for the loss, which was not her fault. But Amanda has something interesting. She calls it the ring theory of grief, and I think it applies to any type of crisis. And the ring theory is that if you think about somebody who's going through the crisis in the moment, being the center of the ring, they're the person that, for the moment, everything revolves around. I thought that was really important, and I wanted to share it with you now. Here is Amanda.
And the idea is that if you are further out on the rings, you may only send care and support inwards, and you cannot burden people with extra asks or questions or things like that. And the further you are towards the center, you can ask for anything you need and say whatever you want towards the people further.
So in the case of my friend, I don't get to know exactly what's happening with her child's treatment. I just send love inwards, and then I can receive whatever she wants to send back out. All of these episodes that I'm bringing up in the specific mini episode are actually really tough. But I want to leave on sort of a happier note. And Dr. Tara, in an episode about parenting through epilepsy and having a long-term medical condition and how that shapes her family unit. And I asked her, what happens if your kids have something similar? Do you have a message for them? And this is Tara's message. It's kind of hopeful.
It's a really great question. I would like them to know that just because you have a health condition doesn't mean that you're less of a person or you can accomplish anything that you want to accomplish. You can still do anything that you want to do. You might have to take some particular precautions. You might have to take a little more care, but I think that's something that I would want to emphasize. It doesn't make you less of a person, and it makes you unique. It makes you a little bit different, but everyone is different in their own way. And I think we can help other people.
Okay, so maybe this is a little bit of a preachy episode. I'm not really sure. It's sort of the episode I wish I had turned to when I had the moment of, oh my gosh, my friend needs me and I don't know what to do to show up. Let me tell you what I actually did, which is I listened to these voices. I've integrated their messages over the years because I've spoken to them and I've sort of taken to heart a lot of their wisdom. And what I did is I said, okay, I got to be specific. I've got to show up and I've got to keep showing up. So I thought, okay, what would happen if I were in my friend's shoes? What would happen if I were in my friend's shoes? And I said, well, the first thing that goes whenever I'm in crisis is my ability to feed myself. So I decided to be specific and send my friend food. So I ordered a 6-week food delivery from a group called Feast and Fettle, which is in New England. They matched my 6 weeks and gave her another 6 weeks. So now she and her daughter have 12 weeks of food. They happen to make all types of food, but they do make vegan food, which is what her dietary restrictions are. And so now she has 12 weeks of vegan food sent to the hospital, so she doesn't even have to worry about that. But that's not enough. As it turns out, it was really helpful for my friend to receive this. So every once in a while, she texts me and goes, I need food right now. And I get her DoorDash from her favorite restaurant. And I know her order at this point. So that's the way in which I chose to be specific. And that's the way in which she chooses to be specific. This is what I need. I need it right now. That feels really, really relevant to what I heard from Erin and what I heard from Chelsea and what I heard from Brooke. The other thing is I intentionally didn't want to just do 1 week or 2 weeks of food delivery. Brooke says keep showing up, make sure it's still there, make sure it's still present. So 12 weeks to me seems really meaningful, and then we'll figure out what she needs after that. Okay, so that's how I integrated the wisdom. I hope it's helpful to my friend. I hope this is a helpful episode to you. And it's also really kind of fun to go back and listen to the old voices. If you want to hear the episodes, please check out all the back episodes of Stork'd. We have 5 seasons. And I hope you re-listen to some of your favorites because there's some really, really good content and wisdom in them. Happy listening.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.